Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. So it's been over 6 weeks now since my last event and I'm finally getting round to doing a video on it. That's what happens when life gets in the way. It was of course the Colchester Clash being run by Scott McHugh, and it'd be great to get out to Colchester again and see some of the regulars from the old 8th edition Triple Crown Wargaming days. We also had several people who had travelled from afar, including the Forgotten North lads coming all the way from Newcastle, so good effort to you. 2,000 points, 20-0 scoring, uncomped, apart from the rule of 3, with no exception for core units, which was one of the reasons that was pushing me towards taking my dwarfs rather than my nomads. Same dwarf list, which I was still getting used to, so it's that sort of defensive line hammer strategy based around a big line of rangers with the king, 2 thanes and a runesmith. It's got 3 iron wardens with torpedoes, 2 gyrocopters and a doomseeker. I'll put the list on the screen now. It's pretty much exactly the same as my last tournament report, only change being the rune combination on the doomseeker. So game 1 was against Toby's Warriors, and I know Toby from some of the 8th Ed events. I've played him a couple times before. He's running a sorcerer on dragon, a demon prince, a chaos giant, a big giant spawn, 3 lines of Forsaken, 2 Shartaks and a couple of units of Warhounds. And just looking at the battlefield, the way it's set out there in the picture, and without trying to be too negative, I always tell it like it is on this channel. Sort of thinking back before the tournament, while I was really looking forward to the event, I wasn't looking forward to all of the games particularly. Obviously I don't know who I'm going to play, but what I'm finding at the moment is with 2,000 point games with 1,000 point characters, there's not a lot of variation in the style of armies, and many of the Chaos armies look quite similar, many of the Bretonian armies look very similar, and it feels like I'm doing the same game with a slight tweak sort of over and over again. And when you look at the battlefield, it's missing something quite obvious, right? There's no ranked up infantry, and I think it's still lacking that. If you really want to bring in the die-hard fans of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, it's got to be not Hero Hammer, right? And I'm not trying to go on a rant at the moment. I really enjoy Old World events. I want Old World to be a success, but just, I suppose, lamenting the state of the game as it stands. Anyway, great opening game against the Warriors, the army which I have played the most against in Old World, I'd say, so far. I did a good job at holding back the tide, sniping off the giant quite early on with the torpedoes, using the Rangers' crossbows to thin out the Forsaken, and the gyrocopters to hold off the packs of dogs. The highlight of the game being one of my gyrocopters on the right hand side chaffing up the giant spawn, and then ends up holding him up for 3 turns. The Doomseeker joins the fight, takes some wounds off and dies, and eventually the gyrocopter brings down the giant spawn. So congratulations to that gyrocopter. I'll have to give him a heroic name after that. One of the crucial mistakes I made in this game was not pivoting the line towards the advancing dragon and demon prince on my left flank. My belief was that my king would be able to just move through the ranks to take the challenge of the dragon when he came in. And my mistake for getting the rules wrong, the too many characters rule means that my king couldn't join the fighting rank to accept the challenge. And this was so annoying because obviously my unit has 2 ranks, and had it been 1 rank or 3 ranks, then I would have been able to accept the challenge. But because it was exactly 2 ranks, and my king on shield bearers also takes up those 2 ranks, it meant he couldn't join the fighting rank to accept the challenge, which just felt like I was losing on a technicality there. But it is what it is, and it did cost me the games, because without my toughness 10 lord to tank the damage in the challenge, I ended up losing combat narrowly with the line and breaking. And then of course when you're running a long line, it's a higher risk strategy, right? Because as soon as your unit flees, it pivots and it leaves the table. So serves me right for taking a unit with a rank in Old World. Always go full line hammer, right? Never take ranks in Warhammer The Old World. So game 2, I'm up against Manway's Tomb Kings, and he's got the Tomb King on dragon, Hierophant on steed, BSB on a chariot, big bus of 7 serpents, around 40 skeletons or so with poison arrows, skirmishing horse archers, a couple of chariots and an ambushing scorpion, Typical old world battle scene, as you can see there. Big line of skeletons facing off against my big line of rangers. Not much damage being done by either side, to be honest. I've learned now, after playing undead with dwarves several times, that there's no real point in shooting them. Unless they've got a small unit that you're confident that you can kill off the whole unit in one round of shooting, because everything just comes back to life. So my shooting was purely focused on the bone dragon. He did have a special rule, I forget what it's called now, where he could take some of the wounds onto his BSB from the bone dragon if they were in close proximity. But after a turn or two, the bone dragon obviously tried to fly around the flank and sort of left the vicinity of the BSB. The serpents were advancing. After 3 or 4 turns, the weight of the torpedoes knocking wounds off, my gun thane popping out of the unit to take some pot shots, we finally brought down the dragon just as it was coming into combat on a stand and shoot. Things started to swing my way. The serpents crashed into my line, beginning quite a sort of grindy combat there with the rangers, and then the chariots came in to help on the next turn, but eventually just the weight of numbers of those great weapon attacks thinning out the undead and popping the unit eventually, which brought the game to a close, and it turned out to be quite a big win for the dwarfs. Game 3, I was up against Rob's Warriors, another Warriors list, this time with the Lord on Dragon, big bus of Knights with an Exalted Champion and level 4, 1 Giant Spawn, unit of Dragon Ogres, 2 Lone Shartaks, another hard as nails Chaos Army coming towards me full pace. A quick game actually, in that my shooting was largely ineffective. The Knights were at -1 to hit from the, Icon of Darkness. Plinked a few wounds off some of the Dragon Ogres and managed to bring down the spawn just in time before it hit my line. The dragon was super aggressive and went in cold quite early on. It lost combat and gave ground, because obviously I'm challenging him out with my Toughness 10 King. It was annoying though, because at the time that he gave ground, the spawn was literally 1 inch away from my line, meaning that I couldn't charge the dragon on my turn without hitting the spawn first, right? So I would have had to charge the spawn instead. Had he been like 2 inches away, the spawn, or had I, shot the spawn off the turn prior, then I would have been able to charge the Dragon Lord on my turn, charge him also in the rear with the gyrocopter, and then I could have just continued the challenge. I would have had +6 combat res static, and then in all likelihood break the dragon and run him down with the gyrocopter. But I just missed that opportunity because of the positioning of this giant spawn. Now, maybe I could have just charged the Dragon Lord just with the gyrocopter, hoping to get a sort of cascading combat into the Lord. But I don't know, maybe I just didn't think of it at the time, or I just really wanted to shoot the spawn first and hold my line still. I can't remember exactly, but I felt like I'd missed an opportunity to kill the Dragon Lord. Anyway, the big combat sort of began on turn 3 and lasted until turn 6, with the Dragon Ogres and the Knights all fighting into my line, and I actually thought it was lights out for the Dwarfs, but they managed to just hold and grind it out and give ground and grind it out a bit more, and we ended up finishing off the Dragon Ogres and the Knights, but I did lose my unit of Rangers and the Thane BSB, I think. The King survived. It was a very bloody game, and it finished a 10-10 draw. Game 4 was against Brennan's Vampire Counts, and shout out to Brennan. I know him from the 8th edition days as well. One of my favourite opponents actually, because he's always super clear at explaining everything that he's doing as he's doing it, and so it's a joy to play him. It was Watchtower, so with the central objective there that you've got to take at the end of the game for a bonus 300 victory points, if I remember correctly. He has level 4 on Mortis Engine, a Vampire on Steed with 9 Blood Knights, big bus of Graveguard as well with the BSB, a swarm of giant bats, a bat swarm and giant bats, so two different units. Small compact army really, just the one Scream, which is not a big worry for Dwarfs anyway. I faced an army quite similar to this before actually. If you see a previous bat rep on my channel, Dwarfs versus Vampire Counts, I don't have enough artillery to try and take out all 9 Blood Knights at once, which of course is what you've got to do, because they can raise 8 Blood Knights a turn with the 2, the raised dead spell. Invocate, that's the one. The vampire has illusion magic with the Lore Familiar, right? So he's got the doppelganger, and his unit's going to be -1 to hit anyway. The Blood Knight train just is marauding around the right side of the board, cleaning up my units of Iron Drakes, which, to be honest, I probably should have just hid in this game, because whatever they shoot is going to come back to life anyway, so I probably could have just hidden those Iron Drakes and just advanced forward with my Rangers to try and get into combat. The Skellies are advancing in the centre, and the Swarms take the central objective early on. Although I was down on points by the time the big charge came in, it worked out quite well in that, firstly, those Blood Knights, because of where they were positioned in the bottom right corner and the terrain, they end up only getting a sort of corner clip charge onto the line, which meant that the vampire didn't get his full whack of attacks, and of course he didn't want to challenge my king. But secondly, I pulled my Runesmith out of the unit just in time so I could use my runes of spellbreaking to stop the spectral doppelganger, because normally what happens is, if the Runesmith's in combat, if the unit's in combat, the Runesmith can't dispel, and then of course he's able to just use the assailments at will. With the weight of all the Graveguard crashing in and the Knights, I only lost combat very narrowly and gave ground. And then the next turn, I had the Gyrocopters come in the rear and the flank, and the Doomseeker joined the fray as well, all with impact hits, of course, an extra res for flank and rear, and then just managed to grind out the combat and obviously dispel the Spectral Doppelganger again. And then I managed to crumble the units, and that it was a big swing to the Dwarfs in sort of turn 4 or something. And then Brennan's luck turned even more because his Mortis engine rolled a double 1 for the charge and failed to come into the big combat, and then it sort of went downhill for the vampire counts from there. And then last turn, the Rangers sort of charged the tower, or turn 5 they charged the tower, cleared out the swarms, and took the objective, and so it finished a big 20-0 to the Dwarfs. Game 5, and it's David's Bretonian Exiles, and he's got a choppy Baron on Royal Peg in a unit of 5 pegs with Vanguard, 3 units of Knights of the Realm, a level 3 with the Mounted Yeoman, 2 Bombards and a unit of Archers, and it's that cookie cutter Exiles list, again, an army that I've played quite a bit in the past as well. I know that the Iron Drakes are lethal against all the Knights, right, because they wound everything on 2s, it's -1 AP, and they've got lots of Armour Bane, and so I know I can take quite a few of them out before they come. The pegs have Vanguard, and I'm a little bit worried about them getting that first turn charge into what they want, and I've only got one. He ends up deploying after I've deployed, and he gets them all in the corner there. The Knights try to charge into the Drakes, and they get firebombed to the man with only the BSB making it into combat. I managed to shoot off, I think, 3 of the pegs as they come forward, and then 2 of them end up fleeing, and the Baron comes forward on his own. And a combination of bombard shots, the Pillar of Fire, and the Baron just sort of kill off all my Drakes, and then everything just sort of flees to the back of the board. It's partly my fault, of course, obviously, because I've got this long line of Rangers which is a bit encumbered by the terrain. They've got this big tower in the way, and unfortunately I don't have anything long range to hit the back board edge, nor am I able to chase him down there, because all I've got is Gyrocopters that could actually get to the back of the board by the end of the game. And so it finishes a narrow win to the Brets, having just sort of scored slightly more VPs than me, and of course my Doomseeker can't get himself killed. Win to the Brets. Bit disappointing, because I'd killed 3 out of 5 of the pegs, and so not enough to get any VPs from there. And I'd had loads of chances to kill the lone Baron and BSB as they were fleeing with my shooting, but they kept passing their armour saves, and David played a good game, played a very tactical game, and that's what you should do at an event, of course. I'm not sure I would have done that in Game 5 of the event, because of course, we were on table 4 or 5, so you've got, what are we, 8th, 9th or something like that in the rankings before the game, so you've got a chance of getting up the rankings and possibly getting a podium position, depending on how close it is at the top. But not if you kind of, flee on the last few turns, right? You've got to go for it. Although, to be fair to David, his units had taken quite a beating. I think his Barons were on 1 wound and 2 wounds, respectively. He'd lost a unit of Knights, and therefore he didn't have that much left. It would have taken quite a big combo charge to tackle that line. So probably the best move by retreating to the back of the board. But it did make for a bit of an anticlimax to the Game 5 of the weekend. So we finished off with 2 wins, 2 loss and a draw. 2 quite big wins, a draw and then 1 big loss and 1 narrow loss. Happy with how I played each round. The draw to Chaos in Game 3 was a bit frustrating because I feel like I could have got that Chaos Dragon with a little bit different decisions, or if the luck had gone my way with the giant Chaos Spawn. The loss to Chaos in round 1 was basically a mistake that I won't make again, right? Always go full line hammer, or at least take 3 ranks instead of 2, or just pivot your line so that your character that you want to take the challenge is in the fighting rank. The loss against the Brets round 5, I mean, that's just a weakness of the list, really. I don't have anything long range that can deal with an army that just wants to run away from me. I could take out the Doomseeker, maybe put in a Grudge Thrower, but it just feels like tinkering at the edges is something that's not really going to make a big difference. What I could have done was deployed a bit differently, perhaps scouting the Rangers so that I was further up the board, because once he'd positioned all of his pegs in that far side and the top left of the board, I could have just scouted my Rangers so I'm kind of extending up the board, and then play a sort of sideways matchup, because obviously you can still, when you scout, you deploy them last, right? So you've got to put down your characters first, but if you can scout the line in a way so that part of your line is still in your deployment zone, then you can move your characters in there turn 1. I could have still put them in a way so that the vanguarding pegs would not be able to charge me straight away, or at least not in a way that would be risk-free for them, right? Because obviously I've got lots of other shooting as well. So this dwarf list, I initially took it to one event and thought about retiring it straight after, because it's kind of a gunline army but without artillery, and I really love dwarf artillery, but they're just not that good in this edition, and I just thought that this army wasn't the most fun to play, especially after playing with a Nomadic War, which is like the most fun army to play. And also, taking advantage of the line hammer mechanic is frustrating for some opponents, right? I mean, I would argue that it's no more frustrating than playing against Double Dragon or 360 Skirmishers or lots of Fanatics or whatever. There's plenty of other janky stuff in the game. But just the aesthetics of it is bad. And so after the first event I went to, I thought I would retire, but then that event turned out to be a very small event, and I thought, okay, well, let's give it a go at another larger event. Dwarfs generally, I think, are in an interesting spot. The playstyle has traditionally been baiting in the enemy with artillery and then ganging up on them with blocks of dwarves once they get close to you, right? And that's the way I want to play with them. But, now artillery is pretty crap, infantry are pretty crap, and so nothing in your army really does any damage, right? You're just relying on combat res to win fights, or you could run a line, right? Which is the only really way you can get lots of attacks. You either run a line with shooting and close combat, or you can use drill to fan out into a line. So I'm planning a new dwarf list, Grand Army still, but kind of based more around the way I want to play dwarves, even if it isn't that strong, right? So I can use artillery, use some shooting attacks to bait them in, and then try and gang up on them by stacking the combat res with blocks of dwarfs, right? I don't know if it'll work. I don't think it'll work at 2,000 points with 50% characters, because it's just too character heavy, and you need the king. You need the king to challenge the dragon, or there's no way you can win without going full characters. But both the Arcane Journal lists, I think, also have their place and can work. And perhaps I'll do a separate video on dwarf tactics sometime. I think dwarves are one of the most interesting factions in Old World, actually, because you're being forced to use infantry in a game where infantry are bottom of the food chain. And so trying to actually make infantry work, slow infantry, is a challenge in itself. But I think the next event I go to with dwarves would have to be more than 2,000 points, or a totally new list. And so I'll have to put my thinking cap on. But I am a little bit disillusioned with Old World at 2,000 points currently. Actually painting a new army at the moment, so look out for a video about my progress on that soon. So I hope you like this mini super fast tournament report. Like, subscribe, leave a comment as usual, and I'll catch you on the next one. Goodbye.